to your brains before the end of the meeting. ScienceCafeSF.com. You'll find video of this event up in about a week, including the presentation that Philippe has made.
And also I wanted to make clear, in addition to recruiting adults with social anxiety, social phobia, we also need healthy adults. Meaning adults who have no history of psychiatric problems, because we always have healthy controls to do brain imaging in all of our studies, and to contrast to people who have social anxiety or depression or whatever. So we're going to open up to more questions, but I just want to show you a couple of pictures, and I won't make any comments. But look at the current picture. Practicing kids, at home, in school. These are our kids, 4th, 5th, 6th graders, before mindfulness, during mindfulness, after mindfulness, coming to either near you. So
we're going to take a question over here.
Yes, let's take questions.
So I have a little bit of a narrative before I ask my question.
Your brain is fine.
You have no idea. I'm really thrilled that this is happening. I've been waiting for something like this for a long time. I've practiced mindfulness meditation for 8 years now. And my recent partner, practiced it for 4 years. And we would go off and do our 10-day silent retreats and come back and share our experiences. The experiences for me were, we had profoundly different experiences, of course, for different human beings, different brains. For me, it was 10 days of bliss. For him, it was 10 days of suffering. He ended up taking his own life this year. And so and I'm a writer, and I'm going to be writing about this, and I'm just thirsty for knowledge. What I want to know from your research, and I imagine more of this research is going to be happening, like you said, but you said that there's, with mindfulness, if they're practicing mindfulness, that is one question, that there's a decrease in the depressive symptoms. But I'm curious, with your participants, did you know if they had a chemical imbalance or social anxiety disorder beforehand? Or are these, I had to write this all down, there's a lot or can some meditation make it worse? Or are they not able to participate in the mindfulness because their brains are already damaged?
Thank you for the question. And I have many responses flashing in my mind right now. Meditation, let's see if I can try to address. Meditation is not for everybody. There are different stages in life when different practices can be helpful. Mindfulness is only one practice. I hope I made that clear in one of the earlier slides. There's a whole, when you think about developmental trajectory from childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and further, there is a similar, not similar, but there's also a trajectory of meditation practices in spiritual progression, or mental development, if you want to say. There are certain practices that aren't supposed to be practiced before other ones. And under the guidance of a skillful teacher, he or she will say, now you do this, now you don't do that, now you get out of here, now you come back. I have seen people try to do different practices, both monks and nuns, in the Dalai Lama's monastery, where I lived for 4 years, here, elsewhere, where people got worse. So I totally agree. There was somebody here who was asking, sorry I had my back to you. Somebody asked during the intermission about post-traumatic stress disorder, and in fact we tried to do a study at the Palo Alto. Checking. This one is out.
All right, we have a new one coming in.
We tried to do a study of mindfulness meditation at the residential post-traumatic stress disorder clinic at the Palo Alto VA, and with guys, men, residential, totally backfired. So there's really an important lesson. So whenever I give talks, I try to really create present the caveat that meditation is not for everyone, and also that certain practices can be iatrogenic, harmful. So it's really important to understand that some of these practices, especially in retreat, because when you get into a retreat, you become very, very sensitive. And you have to think about, do I have the cast iron mind space, the ability to hold the experiences that come up when I do deeper meditation practice? I need to be sensitive, but if I'm also very, very sensitive, then there may be times I have to lean back from certain practices. And this is where skillfulness comes in. And I have seen, when I was even at the monastery, it was almost the Dalai Lama's monastery, I saw one of the monks doing a meditation retreat, and then he became possessed. Having said that, I want to refer you to a paper. One of the most elegant, beautiful clinical...
Did you just say obsessed or possessed?
Possessed by a spirit, and then they had to do practices to get rid of the spirit. He became imbalanced.
Because you did the wrong practice.
Correct. And probably pushed too hard. Yeah. So any of these practices, also, I think that's the basic thing to know. Our minds are very powerful, but they're also very sensitive. And different practices can be incredibly powerful. So we need to be, I need to know that I can go to the edge this far, but I can't go further. Then 5 years from now, when I'm feeling a little more solid, stronger, I could go a little further. I can go a little further. So a lot of skillfulness is important. And also having a teacher, I think, is really, really important. And that's not easy to know who's a good teacher and who's not. But I wanted to refer you to a paper. One of the most beautiful researchers I just met him last week from Oxford University, Mark Williams. Mark Williams, clinical psychologist and researcher. He has written a paper on the use of mindfulness meditation for people who are currently suicidal. It's the only paper I know on that, and he's a fantastic person. So I would refer you to that, and I can try. I have a PDF, so I can try to link that. So yeah, I would say be careful, because the minds are sensitive, and any practice, alcohol, drugs, sex, relationships, right? Everything can throw people off. And so part of the skillfulness, and I'm not very good at it, is becoming more, I would say if you had to pick one thing, is becoming more intimately aware with how my mind works. What are the spaces where I feel off, where I feel balanced? What are the things that throw me and then bring me back? Because that's something that's really individual to each person. So that's part of the practice, becoming more beautifully, elegantly, intimately aware of how my own mental processes work. And no one can tell you that from the outside. But you had lots of other questions.
I think.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
To be continued. Okay.
No.
We're going to have to shuttle Mike, so I apologize for the little delay in it.
Hi. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned there were 3 elements to kind of a complete program. One of which is yoga.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, most of the benefits that you talked about meditation seem to be similar to the benefits that you get from yoga. So if you could just talk about how they complement and how they're the same and different, that would be great.
So I love yoga. I love it. I love the feeling I have after finishing yoga, and even during, and the pain and the sweat. But what's really, really cool to remember is that physical yoga, hatha yoga, flow, vinyasa, etc., was all in the service of preparing the body to be aware enough to be aware of the breath. Then enhancing awareness of the breath, because it's always there, for the purpose of then sitting down or walking and meditating. So the traditional texts, yoga, to enhance awareness of the breath, to then be able to start meditation practice. That's the purpose. Some teachers here do meditation after yoga. And in fact, I think if you do an hour and a half yoga practice and then sit down and meditate, do your own test in your own laboratory, which is yourself. Try sitting and meditating, and then do a yoga practice, and then sit and meditate, and see what you experience. So lots of studies are going on with yoga right now. One of the best studies from Washington University, Seattle, for lower back pain, great results. Lots of studies on looking at yoga in kids and adolescents. Why? Because somebody just asked the question during the intermission. Kids or people with a lot of agitation, maybe they can't sit still. and maybe sitting would make them feel like, gosh, I really am a failure. I can't do this. The teacher says to focus on my breath. I can't do that. Well, you know what? Maybe it's better if they get up and do moving yoga, basketball, mindfulness, walking meditation, eating meditation. So with the kids you saw in the picture, we did a lot of tangerine eating mindfulness practice. So much so that some of the kids were like, I hated tangerines, but after the mindfulness course, I learned how to love them. So, skillfulness. And so yoga is incredibly powerful, wonderful, but also be careful. I've been injured many times doing yoga, but I still do it because I really enjoy it. But I think doing the yoga practice and then meditating.
Let's take a question over here on the left side. I got this one working.
Okay.
Anyone here on the left side of the room where I'm at? Oh, here we go. On the stage.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, you know, since you just said that you tried this with the post-traumatic stress disorder group and it backfired, would it sound like maybe sort of the opposite as with the social anxiety group?
Yes.
So that means that one is not to assume that these different types of anxiety disorders, like you can't extrapolate them because
They're different.
They're very
Oh
different.
yes, like obsessive compulsive disorder, very different. Hoarding, which is one type, subset of OCD, very different, difficult to treat. They're very different from each other.
Do you mean very different with meditation treatment?
No, different to treat, different types of anxiety, different kinds of ways of trying to do clinical interventions. Yeah, they're very different, even different in the brain. Yeah, they're very different.
So are you going to look into how meditation works with them? Just out of curiosity.
The meditation, people are interested in that, but again, meditation is, there are many different kinds of practices, and they're not for everyone. And also going back to the question, assessing where people are at in terms of their trajectory. You give people tools that they're ready to use. Give me a hammer, I'm adult enough to use one. But you don't give it to a 3-year-old because that's not the right tool appropriate for that level of development. So I think what's going to happen over the next decade is we're going to become much more aware of the quality of different practices, the quality of different mental profiles, and the challenge is to match. And also the knowledge that the one practice that might work for me for 2 years, when I've shifted, I need a different practice. So also that not getting rigid about a certain practice too.
So I guess my quick follow-up question is, within like a clinical environment, it sounds like even the sort of teaching method or however you can convey the practices is much more kind of individualized or has the potential to be more fine-tuned and individualized than, say, like going into a meditation center and the response that you get with your questions is always like, just observe, you know.
Just observe.
You know, like, it seems to be...
No, I know what you're saying. And this is a very cool thing. So to date, well, this goes back to having a relationship with a teacher for meditation. Being a meditator doesn't mean that the person doesn't need psychotherapy sometimes. Being in psychotherapy can be incredibly helpful. It can also be harmful. It depends on the skillfulness. There are many psychotherapists who are trying to bring different meditation practices into psychotherapy. Very cool, very interesting, a lot of enthusiasm. No studies. The only data that we have thus far, I'm speaking as a scientist right now, is from group studies, group practices. So we don't really have data to yet. There's not even a treatment protocol or manual for individualized mindfulness in the context of psychotherapy. There's one person I just met last month in Australia that he's written the first book. It's not published yet, where he's trying to bring on an individual basis. But again, this goes back to, psychotherapists might be really good at cognitive therapy, or really good at dialectic behavioral therapy, but maybe is not really skillful or knowledgeable in meditation. So, so we're going to have people who are much more skillful. But then again, also in Buddhist centers or meditation centers, it's really a relationship with the teacher, more one-on-one, where he or she really conveys and assesses what you need in the moment. So that's a whole other realm.
I'm over by the bar, and just a quick question that I'm going to ask, because I have the mic in my hand. What took so long? Why is this field of research only 4 to 5 years old, as you indicate?
Great
And I'm
question.
looking for a question over here on the right side. So
Great
just
question.
that.
Right, because these ancient wisdom traditions and also traditions within the West that maybe have been suppressed, why is it that there's coming to fruition now? I mean, we've had yogis and Zen monks and priests and nuns and Hindu gurus for many years now, but why is it exploding now in terms of clinical practice and research? I think there was a lot of hesitation until recently to do any neuroscience or any clinical trials of anything to do with meditation or yoga. It's only in the past few years. I think that people have begun to realize the benefits because enough scientists are practitioners of meditation, have their first person inner incontrovertible experience, and then they say to themselves, whoa, something here, what is the active ingredient? How much can this be generalized? So I think it's a lot of individual people who then, with scientific tools, do randomized clinical trials to say, hey, this is going to be, because there is something to this. So I think there's an openness right now, so much so that even John Kabat-Zinn and other teachers have been invited to the National Institutes of Mental Health to train everyone in mindfulness, to let everyone experience mindfulness. Whole other way to answer this is Google, Yahoo. They're inviting teachers to come because they go, oh, if the employees wake up in the morning and are happy to go to work, see it as a place where there's even some feeling of spiritual development, in addition to programming, in addition to faster computers and better blueberries, blackberries, strawberries. This is real. This is actually really something. Starting a lab meeting with meditation, as opposed to the lab person going, okay, now let's do this, this, this. What does it do over time? How does it change the sensibility of how people feel? There's also the motivation. I think perhaps we could say there are more and more scientists who are thinking, well, am I doing something that is for the benefit of many? Not just my own small egotistical next study of this variable affecting that variable. So I think that there's a phase shift in thinking, and from the clinical psychology perspective, behaviorism, don't talk about thinking and feeling, to cognitive, thinking and feeling and interpreting, to third wave now, which is, I don't even know what to call it.
We're going to take another question over here by the bar, but just a quick comment. We have about a half hour left, and I want to encourage the audience, not just to ask questions, but if you have a personal experience with meditation that you want to bring to your question, I encourage you to bring that too. So make comments, questions, whatever it is.
Hi, I practice Kundalini yoga, and sound meditation is a big part of it, and I've been taught that the sound vibrations do things to balance out brain, left-right brain stuff, and I'm wondering if you have any information or studies that speak to the role of vibration?
I don't think people have really done those with brain imaging, per se. There are simplistic models of the brain, left-right hemisphere, which really are too simplistic. The brain is much, much more complex and fast. We currently don't even really have good models that describe how the brain works. And there are many different methods of imaging the brain. But definitely sound is very fundamental. My wife is pregnant, and I speak to her tummy, our tummy, to our little one, every day. And people who are more advanced and have kids say that, yes, the kids do respond to the sound. So this is pre-thought, prefrontal lobe, pre-thinking, pre-meditating. So yes, there's something very fundamental. But I will share this, one beautiful, elegant study by a friend of mine who does couples therapy, brain imaging, expecting a shock. The wife is lying in the scanner, the partner is standing there, and it's either my partner is holding my hand while I'm dreading a shock, or a stranger, or no one's holding my hand. And looking at one of the same areas that I looked at here with amygdala, emotion reactivity, showing that when my partner is holding my hand, There's something soothing just about the touch that changes brain activity. So what's really cool is taking a very simple experimental design with a question and getting data that helps from the brain, which is not filtered through language, that helps show, whoa, just the physical touch of my partner, not a stranger, it's not just touch by itself, but my partner. So there's something about my mental representation of partner and what it means to be held by a partner that changes my non-controllable emotional reactivity. So sound, obviously, can do that as well.
Just yell here.
Hello. I actually have two questions. The first is, how do you distinguish between meditation and prayer? Where I would define meditation as sort of an inner journey, prayer as an act of communion, or seeking connection with Source, if you will.
Can I answer that? Sure. So that's a good question. And I think there may be people who are more expert than me, but some forms of prayer lead to meditative states. Having said that, there's some forms of prayer, and going back to your question, like when I was in the monastery, one of the things that was really cool was waking up at 5 in the morning and sitting with 40 other monks chanting in Tibetan, and just the sound, and it is communal, and there is energy, and there is a focusing. Having said that, so maybe let's just say, and I want to emphasize there are many kinds of meditations. So some meditations lead to inner stillness and quiet. Other meditations, like analytic debate, is incredibly thinking, intense, logic, breaking apart, analyzing. Other meditations are visualizations with, imagining female Buddhas and things happening. So there are many different forms of meditation, but I think prayer is a way of stilling and centering. And it's centering, but I think prayer is used in many different ways. Sometimes prayer, prayer can be used to ask for something. So I think there's overlap, but they're also different. But you get a part two.
Well, it's not actually part two, but as a practitioner of spiritual practice, how do you account for that in your research as a scientist as far as biases?
Can you restate the question so everyone can hear?
How do we account for prayer as a bias?
Your own personal.
Yes. Great question. So this is a whole issue. Would I do better science if I was not interested in meditation? That's a question. Can I do better? Do I do better research on cognitive therapy because I'm actually trained and practice cognitive therapy? Some people say objectivity, subjectivity. So right now, this is something that a lot of scientists are thinking about now. So if I'm a Catholic practitioner, should I not study Catholic nuns because maybe I'm not objective? So one of the great things about science is, and again, don't trust any one study. Don't trust 2 or 3 studies from the same lab. The best thing to do in terms of for results of research is to look at multiple studies from multiple different labs and meta-analyses, and if there's consistency across experimental designs and results, that's what you trust. So being interested in something, like I'm interested in cooking, but I wouldn't have any qualms about studying cooking, and I'm interested in meditation, so I don't have any qualms about that. But having said that, right now for the first time in 10 years, I am not leading the mindfulness groups for our current studies, because I wanted to have some distance from that, which I think is helpful. But I can also say there are things about meditation that I would not study if I hadn't done it myself.
We're going to take a question over here. He's going to yell. Can you just restate the question?
I will restate the question. Okay.
So my question was more about from what I understand, from what I saw of the studies, what you have is people who self-report a certain series of behaviors and looking at an fMRI show activity in these sectors of the brain have fewer relapses into depression. So you're not actually saying that this is what is.
Okay, so I didn't study depression.
So it was social anxiety.
Yeah.
Or so you didn't actually. You're not actually showing that the brain doesn't do whatever social anxiety does. You're saying that people, given these circumstances, we can say that this is so. People who report this and who have this activity in their brain have, their result is they report in the future less social anxiety disorder. And I guess what I wanted to get at was the technology itself and how much the technology, because right now that's kind of, it's still a little bit in the, it's not quite in the realm of physics. It's still in the realm of self-reporting, people talking about themselves, and with fMRI itself, you're not actually looking at neurons firing, it's the oxygen. It's oxygenation that comes afterwards. So what I wanted to get at was, as we haven't quite gotten to the point where we're understanding the way the brain works, that how much of this information is still kind of anecdote, and how much of this is we have a tool that can get to a level of granularity that then we're actually going to be able to predict other behaviors and other activities and other things. How far away are we from that?
Restate the question.
We'll restate the question. Okay, I'll do my best. So first of all, the best designs are repeated measures, where you take the same people with the same task, pre, post, some kind of intervention. So the data I showed you was the same set of adults with social anxiety at baseline, and then fast forward 3 months after 2.5 months of mindfulness training, and do the same task and interrogate the same, using the same experimental design, comparing them to themselves pre-training. So repeated measures is much better than one time point. So that's one thing. fMRI, which is one type of brain imaging methodology. There are many kinds. There's EEG, there's ERP, there's fMRI, PET, there's MEG, and there's near-infrared spectroscopy. There's many different kinds, and they all have pluses and minuses. So, but similarly, self-report has pluses and minuses. So one of the ways, methodologically, is to use many different levels of granularity, many different tools, in first-person experience, outside observer, brain, self-report, reaction time, to use as many different angles and then try to infer from a whole set of dependent variables, not just one. But that takes a lot of energy, but that's what we're trying to do. And then comparing that, so that's one thing. fMRI is one tool, and I think you need behavior. So in all my papers I talk about brain behavioral mechanisms. Brain constrained by and interpreted by behavior, self-report. We did some studies where we looked at, we put a camera in an MRI scanner, and we had showed people film clips, and we were actually analyzing facial expressions continuously, self-report, and brain. So the more angles that you can use, the more powerful inferences you can make. You cannot make inferences about using fMRI based on one person. All the results I showed you are group analysis. Somebody asked that. The technology, hopefully, will get better and better. But brain imaging, fMRI, is an index of neural activity. It does not measure neural activity. It's another measure called blood oxygen level dependent signal, which reflects neural activity. So it's one step removed. Self-report also reflects brain activity. You can say, I feel sad. Well, brain, mind is feeling sad. Philippe says, I'm feeling sad. That's also a step removed. So also, just to give a very concrete example, emotion. No one has ever seen an emotion or measured an emotion. We measure many things. What Philippe says, what Philippe shows on his face. Neural activity. None of those is an emotion. They all reflect an emotion. No one has ever seen or touched an emotion. Yet we can talk about emotion research, how we change emotion, and so forth. So yes, we are getting lots of reflections, a mosaic, and then trying to infer some underlying construct. But that's most of science.
What does fMRI stand for?
Functional magnetic resonance imaging.
The follow-on with that was just this idea that then, right now we have this model of the brain which does come from fMRI, and does come from like this part does, you hear about this part of the brain does this, and this part of the brain does that. There's lots of different ways that people have come up with to say that's so. How close are we to actually understanding more of the network of it? And is is fMRI the technology, one of, like, what are the technologies that are giving us a better sense of
Yes.
that networked character, unless like this part of the brain is doing it?
So I think that most, if not almost all of the functions that we can think of, seeing a face, feeling love, etc., using language, they're distributed across many different areas. So it's really network, the oscillation of which produces a certain behavior or experience. So many times we try to pick nodes, like one spot. So I would not really trust those things too much, because in fact that's not the way the brain evolved. I don't have one spot that does language. I have many different regions that work together to produce different components of language. There are other, fMRI is really slow. There's a filter, 5 to 6 second wait before bam, and there's a 6 second wait before you get a signal that is the fMRI signal. Something that's much faster is EEG, which is on the order of 4, 5, 6, 7 milliseconds. But that's only measured on the surface and 1 centimeter deep. It doesn't measure subcortical. fMRI, you get a picture of the whole brain. So every technology has pluses and minuses. So what people are doing now, though, is trying to combine technologies that are super fast, technologies that cover spatially the whole brain, and how can you combine them? That's one method, technological. The other thing is statistical analyses. So instead of looking at one particular brain region, what you do is you do statistical analysis that are taking multiple areas simultaneously as the unit of analysis. So functional connectivity between different regions is more important than activity in one region. So that's a statistical approach as opposed to technology approach. So that's a huge thing that's happening now, using different types of imaging techniques, like imaging white matter tracks and brain activity, and seeing how they're coupled as opposed to just looking at each method by itself. So that takes a lot of computers, a lot of computation, and better models. It's a lot of work. You need to do this in lots of groups of people working together. So I hope that helps to explain a little bit. But it's a great question, and none of these techniques are super duper by themselves. You really need, and finally also subjective first person experience is valuable. I mean, if I want to know how you're feeling, I probably trust what you're saying. How are you feeling? I would not trust a brain imaging scan. I would actually speak. So it depends on what the questions are.
Let's take a question over here, and then we'll come back to the 2 questions back on the other side of the room. We'll come back across the room.
Hi. I was wondering if there's anything, I have a teacher question actually. If there was anything in the literature that examines mindfulness meditation and its efficacy with atypical populations.
With what?
With atypical populations.
What's atypical mean?
Like those with autism or Fragile X, and because these populations also have a fair amount of amygdala dysregulation and
Autism and Fragile X.
yes, and it's in mindfulness meditation and practical application might mitigate anxiety in a social context. And my other question.
I think you just answered it. The first one, I just want to say you answered it.
I did?
Yeah. Mindfulness is not a treatment for autism. Mindfulness is incredibly helpful with a list of tons and tons of things. But what it's really helpful for, as the slideshow, is for anxiety symptoms, stress, the tendency to get stuck in thinking. So the extent to which any kind of medical problem, be it fibromyalgia or cardiovascular diseases, lead to stress, lead to anxiety, autism, feeling really uncomfortable in social situations, the extent to which mindfulness helps to reduce the anxiety symptoms, it doesn't do anything to the disorder, but it helps those symptoms. That's why it's a tool. A hammer can be used for many, many things. Mindfulness can be used to help anxiety in many different contexts. So you're answering your question.
So as a tool, I guess that kind of is a good segue to my next question. And can mindfulness be so primed to the point where it becomes more of an automatic process as opposed to something that's employed deliberately?
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to do, thank you so much. I didn't pay him to ask me that question. So let's do something right this moment. And this is something a Tibetan Lama did when he did his meditation. I thought it was so cool. So we're going to do it right now. Ready? You can sit up or you can slouch. It really doesn't matter. Okay, so right this moment, what I'd like you to do is just for a moment, close your eyes. Notice your breath. Notice the sound. Be open to anything that crosses your field of view, your stream of consciousness. You are meditating. Open your eyes. Now close your eyes. Now open your eyes. Okay. When were you meditating? When your eyes were open or closed? Is meditation with your eyes open or closed? Is it when you're focusing on the sound or the breath or the sensation? The point is, if you can bring WD-40 into all of our sticky, fucked up thoughts about what is, even what is Philippe, or what is meditation, the whole point is actually, there is no posture, no moment, no eyes open or closed or slanted, that is not a moment to be aware. And the whole practice of meditation is not to become expert at sitting still for 15 hours straight with no sensation of needing to pee. That is not the goal. The goal, actually, many lamas would say, is to get the hell out of a monastery, get onto 42nd Street, 34th Street, Bell Street, Mission Street, and just be in the presence. So the prayer of the Bodhisattva, a being who is dedicated to being in the world for the benefit of others, is something like this. May I be born in any given form, male, female, whatever, in the place where there's the most suffering, darkness, and confusion, and simply be a source of light and inspiration. So it's not about me. And you can practice that with your eyes open. You can practice it as a male, as a female, a depressed person, a fully balanced person. And the whole thing is to be a source of light and inspiration for others. If you can do that, that is the practice. Mindfulness, breath, lotus, yoga, it's all in the service of getting our asses out on the street and being genuine. That's the goal. It's not to be in a monastery, not to be a monk. It's not to not be depressed. It's not to not have autism, not to not have anxiety. Those are all totally beautifully human. It's to be present. That's the goal. So in all of this, that's why I put that first slide up about sources of inspiration. Those are people who have shown me that's what it means. So mindfulness is really cute, braiding jeans is cute, but it's in the service of transforming, meaning being present when you walk across the street, when you're holding your partner, when you're making your coffee. That's a moment-to-moment practice.
We have a question behind the poll.
Thank you for that, and also thank you for your work.
Just talk it, just yell.
All right. What's on?
Only on the table now.
I was struck by what you said about PTSD.
Yes.
And I would agree that meditation is probably not ameliorative for some things, like psychosis or something that's really biological. I mean, as you said, it's not for everybody. On the other hand, you were talking about meditation as a tool, and I like what you were just saying, is meditation more just aligned with the truth of the reality of things, which to my mind is always ameliorative. So again, I was struck by you saying that it didn't work with PTSD.
In the context of the Palo Alto VA and guys who are coming back from the military.
All right.
There are many forms of PTSD too. And so maybe in different contexts, it would be helpful. But in that context, it totally backfired.
Just to say specifically what I'm wondering about, my teacher, Shinzen Young, has just been contracted by the Pentagon, I heard him on the radio saying this, to work with people coming back from Iraq, which he had some moral issues about, but he decides that's going to help ameliorate suffering. And he gives the analogy sometimes of mindfulness of popping a glancing boil, which he had when he was a kid. There's a moment of pain, but ultimately the tissue can heal. So I find myself wondering with these PTSD people, was the pain too much? Were they in an inpatient context where they had daily therapy, where they had support? You said it failed, and I find myself wondering what failed about it, what other support did they have, what worked and what didn't?
Sure. Context is...
Can you actually do your best to restate that question?
So post-traumatic stress disorder, I mentioned that this one attempt to infuse an inpatient residential program at the Palo Alto VA for men failed. The guys really wanted, it was better for them to get up and do behavioral activation, get up and go and go and go. Having said that, when I was at the San Diego VA, I did mindfulness meditation as part of treatment. I put it into dialectic behavioral therapy, into cognitive behavioral therapy. And there it worked. It was a much smaller group, and it was outpatient treatment. The Palo Alto VA was an inpatient treatment, which is a pressure cooker. They were there for 3 months with therapy, 12 hours a day. So mindfulness.
They were both PTSD?
Yes, but also I want to mention, for people who work with individuals who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, the younger men and women coming back from Iraq, very different flavor and sensibility compared to the Vietnam vets, who are the ones I worked with in San Diego. Very different compared to people who've been raped on the streets. Very different from people who have PTSD from observing or actually engaging in killing people. So there are many different levels. But empirically, there's no mindfulness study, there's no meditation study that I'm aware of that shows in a clinical, randomized clinical trial that shows any form of meditation is clinically, experimentally beneficial for PTSD. Many of those studies are being done right now. I know people who are doing that. But exposure therapy is empirically supported for post-traumatic stress disorder.
I guess I'm...
Yeah, but I just want to say that you can also conceptualize getting still and observing what's happening in my mind as exposure. It's exposure to my inner context. But that has to be done in a context that's safe, where a person, when it's too intense, they can stop. So if you're on retreat and you only get to speak to the teacher every Wednesday, but I'm freaking out on Monday, I need help. So that's why everything is context. And so it can be beneficial, but not for everybody. I mean, if I'm depressed, the last thing I want to do is sit and observe my really intense negative thoughts. If I have post-traumatic stress and I'm thinking, like, when I get triggered, I want to kill, I may not be ready to deal with observing it. So a lot is context, and again, relationship, be it with the therapist or the meditation teacher. And I would say we have to be careful. Most meditation teachers, some are skillful, but many of them are not trained psychologically. They're really good at Buddhist Dharma or Hindu Dharma or Christian Dharma, but when certain psychological processes are going that they are not familiar with, they don't pick up on that. They don't. I've seen it. Some are skillful, some are not.
Okay, we have time for 2 more. We have one over here.
That is a great question. Thank you.
Thank you. This would be an exercise of being heard. Can you hear me? You said the mic wasn't working yet, so. Oh, can I use it? If you can hear me, I'd rather not use the mic if you can hear me.
Videotape can use the mic.
Oh, okay. First, I'd like to make a comment, and you can comment on the comment if you like. I'm not a bodhisattva, I'm not Christ, and I don't believe in reincarnation. And I don't believe in that kind of personal self-sacrifice and torture to come back in the midst of the worst of things to try to do good and save all of humanity. So that's the way I feel about that. But my question is,
and there we go.
in regard to this death meditation, my question is like, how many different kinds of meditation would you say there are? And is this from a tradition primarily of Tibetan Buddhism? Because I know in India they meditate on corpses and death. There's been lots of death in China, so I imagine for Chinese Buddhists probably thought that way as well. And so maybe there's an international, cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic origin to that sort of thing. And finally, conjoined to that is my other question. How many forms of meditation would you say there are? Because nature is manifold, it's vast, it's generous, and I would say that probably it's virtually infinite in terms of what you can meditate on and about and how. Maybe I might be wrong, but what do you say?
I say yes. Rock and roll? Yeah. One thought that crossed my mind was when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in Spain. He was invited to, a Trappist or Jesuit monastery. And what he was intrigued by was that this order, some of the monks practiced the following. You wake up in the morning, you make your tea or your coffee, you walk out of the monastery, and these monks had dug a hole in the ground, and they would go sit in the hole, where in the future the coffin will be. Right now they sit and they meditate on their own death. So Catholic meditation on death. And you know, there's nothing morbid about it. It's actually just a way of getting in touch with the moment. So here's a practice I do in the mindfulness class, right? It's very simple. Every moment, I, Philippe, am closer to being dead. Even after saying this word, right now, I'm that much closer to my death. That can either be a source of freedom, it can be a source of like, well, I better get my shit together and clarify my values, or it can be, my gosh, I'm freaking out, I'm going to be dead. So this is just a fundamental way of saying, I can get into soap opera mind, or I can try to like be present. My wife is very happy when I'm present. So all these practices are in the service of being more present, full, enjoying the vicissitudes of the mind, not getting scared by what comes up, being skillful enough to hold the most blissful experiences and the most scary experiences, wanting to die, wanting to kill. I've had all those thoughts. But there's something about going, okay, that's part of what it means to be human, and being okay with that. Having that WD-40 psychological flexibility that is not shutting out people, things, experiences. But you have to build up to that slow. If I'm a crackhead, the last thing I want to do is go to a corner where they're selling crack, right? That would not be skillful. So there's something that behooves us to become more intimate, more aware of our own, don't worry about everybody else, our own psychological processes. How does my mind work?
We're going to take two more quick questions before we close, and I got them over here. So here's one.
Thank you for the question.
Quick comment and question. There's also a scientific notion, I believe, that the very act of observing something changes it. So in that sense, I wouldn't worry about objectivity and just do your thing. And my question, which I asked at the very end of the intermission, and I'll ask again, is for people with increased awareness, what will happen sometimes is they become increasingly aware of other people's intentions or energies that may be coming in through other people. And so people around the people with increased awareness may become uncomfortable or jealous or other negative acting out. So my question is, how might you and your colleagues regard that or address that?
We haven't studied that. We haven't studied that. But you know, when you're saying that, the only thought that was crossing my mind was be kind. Jealousy comes up. You know, other people write better than I do. Other people have much better, cute, interesting, fascinating experimental designs than I do. Just appreciate. Be kind. A lot of things we can't control in others, but from our side.
I guess that's the motto for tonight's talk. We have one last question right here, and I'll make a couple announcements just before we close. Are you going to be available to hang out just for a couple minutes to answer any more lingering questions?
Sure. If we can have a drink.
You can have a drink right now.
No. Not until after this question. No, I'm just joking. No, but really, it's great everyone asking, but I think as Kishore mentioned, let this be stimulation for all of us to think. Everyone's mind is their own laboratory, and it's a great place to do research.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but one question that I'm really interested in. You were talking about people chanting together or meditating together. Is there any body of research on entrainment happening with people's minds? Like, if people are chanting together, that people are in the same, they get the same particular much of a pattern, like, instead of someone's holding your hand when you're on an MRI, or you're in a stressful situation, there can be some kind of communication between the two.
I'm sure there's probably a huge literature on that in social psychology, looking at behaviors in groups and how that gets entrained in groups. Not in brain imaging that I'm aware of, because brain imaging puts one person in the scanner at a time, so you don't have a group. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, living in a monastery or living, in San Francisco, there's a certain sensibility, style of clothing, certain feeling that arises, and having people who show up even here, there's a certain sense of group appreciation for thinking, analyzing science, debate, raising questions. But I'm social. If you go to social psychology journals, I'm sure they've been doing studies on this for decades on group activities and how it affects group behavior.
Because sometimes when you're sitting with a teacher,
Mm.
there's some kind of energy that happens with the entire group.
Yeah, there's inspiration. It's tough to meditate by yourself. It's tough to do sports by yourself. But when you're in a group of runners or a group of meditators or a group of people who like eating good food, there's certain group energy that enhances it. That's also why research, when we do research, we're so incredibly interconnected. It's the energy of the group of people thinking, analyzing, sharing ideas that makes it possible to do science. You can't do science by yourself. And meditation too, you really need other people. That's why there's the word, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. The Sangha is this incredible community of people who give you energy and say you're not crazy for trying to work on analyzing and bringing into your life. So you need the group. The group is one of the gems. Yeah. That's a good note to end on. And just want to thank everyone for this club, which is incredibly great for having us. And then, this is my first time at the Scientific Cafe, and I read about it on a Tuesday science section, New York Times, a couple of years ago, and thought, I really want to do it. So when I actually got moved to San Francisco, I just typed in Google, and I Googled Scientific Cafe, and Kishore's website came up. And so I was like, so I called him because I'm like, yeah, I would love to do something. And so, great big thank you to Kishore.
Thank you, everyone. I very much appreciate that applause, but when it comes down to it, these events don't happen unless you guys show up. And show up with your curiosity, show up with your drive. I just want to share one thing somebody said to me once that I found as the most moving thing ever. He described himself as this: I am just fucking curious about the world. And when he said that, there was something that ignited in me that said, yeah, that is innate in all of us. So I really appreciate all of you showing up today and asking questions and just being interested in this kind of stuff. And I also want to recognize a few people. First, Jason behind the bar, who's been taking care of us from 370 Ridge. And I wish, well, I don't wish. I don't do this all by myself. My friend Rich, right here behind the video camera, has been dutiful. And at the door, Deb and Miss Kate have been greeting you for all throughout the night. So thank you to all of them. Just a few comments. ScienceCafeSF.com. Meaningful pause. You'll find all sorts of information on there, blog posts. We had a physicist just post on how fMRI works. So if you heard fMRI all night, you're like, well, what the hell is that? You can find out on my website. So you find out about upcoming talks. Just one click plug. We'll be here in 2 weeks, Monday, December 10th. And the topic is, do drug companies help or hurt patients? We're going to have a professor of medicine from Stanford talk about the process by which a drug comes to market and is deployed into the market. And he's going to use a case study of Merck with two various drugs, ivermectin, which cured a disease in Africa, and Vioxx, which has now killed over 50,000 people here in the States. So, and I just want to hammer that one point home. We talk a lot about 9/11, especially a certain Republican presidential candidate. That's 3,500 deaths. We're talking about 50,000 just here in the US due to this drug's development and deployment. So I cannot understate the value of you coming and taking part in this talk, especially a young audience. If you're not on medicine, there's a chance that sometime in your life that you will be. So I encourage everyone to come out. It'll be Monday, December 10th. It'll be an excellent talk. Just a quick last couple notes. Thank you again for being here. One big last hand for Philippe for being an excellent person. And this is by far the largest audience I've ever had, by about 5 times. So I will cover meditation again in the future. There's a topic suggestion bowl up front if you know have a topic for a suggestion. And my email list also, and there's a sign up front. And thank you again. Have a good night.